All right, we want to go back now to our top story. Some encouraging signals tonight for Ukraine. NATO foreign ministers meeting in Norway today said that the door for membership remains open. The meeting also discussed the need to guarantee Ukraine's future security once the war with Russia is history. Most foreign ministers agreed that because of NATO's mutual defense clause, there can be no further discussion of Ukrainian membership until then. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg also said that the alliance wants to bring Sweden into the fold by July. For more now, I'm joined by Rose Gottemoeller, the former NATO Deputy Secretary General and now a lecturer in international studies at Stanford University in California. It's good to have you on the program, Ms. Gottemoeller. I want to ask you, we know that Ukraine wants to join NATO. What has to happen in order to make that a reality other than having this war become history?
I think Ukraine needs to stay on the path that it's actually been on now since the first invasion of Ukraine when Russia seized Crimea in 2014, and that is to work hard on integrating its military capability and capacity into basically the NATO style of fighting. And NATO has done a lot. I'm very proud of NATO for helping to train Ukrainians in these 8 years since the seizure of Crimea. It shows on the battlefield today in Ukraine how effective they are. So that interoperability is really a very important aspect. It's a more technical aspect. It's beyond the political. Clearly, Ukraine is not getting into NATO until this war is over. I liked what I heard Tony Blinken say today about preparing it to defend itself in the medium and long term as well. But honestly, I think that the continued hard work that Ukraine has been doing to make sure that its military is up to NATO standards is an extremely important pathway for Ukraine and one that it should continue on.
Well, when we're talking about security guarantees for Ukraine from NATO, because it's not a member of NATO, are we talking about arming the Ukrainian military to the hilt so that it can do exactly what it would do if it were a member of NATO? I mean, is that really the difference here? Because if it were a member of NATO, we would be talking about actually having soldiers on the ground.
Well, NATO has been providing military assistance right along throughout this terrible war of aggression, Russian aggression in Ukraine. They've been providing military assistance right along, and it has resulted in more and more advanced NATO once again, interoperable military equipment going to Ukraine. But it also has resulted in Ukraine, I think, being a more modern armed forces, and I think that is going to be very important into the medium and long term. As Tony Blinken was saying today, I see that process of continued provision of military assistance continuing, but I don't think it's qualitatively going to be really much beyond what we've been seeing up to this point. And clearly, the longer range capabilities, both longer range military missiles and that type of thing, but also armored vehicles, the ability to carry out this summer offensive now that's been in planning for some time. These are all steps that NATO is doing anyway, and I think will continue to do going forward.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, how long do you think it will take before Ukraine is a full-fledged member of NATO? But all of that really depends on this war with Russia ending first, right? So when we're talking about Ukraine's membership in NATO, Russia really is calling the shots right now, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, because Ukraine also has agency here, and Ukraine, again, is doing what it can to develop its military capabilities and capacity. But also NATO has certain requirements with regard to overall governance of a country. And Ukraine has, in recent years, been suffering a lot from corruption. And this has been something that NATO has been talking repeatedly to Ukraine about, even before this terrible war began. And so there are issues that NATO and Ukraine will be tackling together, I'm sure, just to ensure that Ukraine's governance, its economic system, again, are up to European standards. And by the way, this is going to help also with European Union membership for Ukraine. And Ukraine is on a fast track for European Union membership.
Let me ask you before we run out of time, and that is Sweden's possible membership in NATO. Secretary General Stoltenberg today said that he hopes that by July, that will be the deadline for a yes to Sweden joining NATO. Was he wise in putting a firm date down, knowing that there is this Turkish opposition?
Well, certainly Sweden has checked the box in terms of doing what President Erdogan, what Turkey has asked of them in upping their game in the fight against terrorism. This terrorism legislation that was just passed by the Swedish parliament, I understand, is going into force even today. So Sweden's been doing its part. And I think from the perspective of the NATO allies, the other NATO allies, all of whom, except for, well, there's the question about Hungary, but I don't think that's as serious as on the Turkish side, that there is a real consensus among all NATO members that the time is right for Sweden to come in. And furthermore, it's going to be a huge upping of the security of NATO in the Arctic and the polar regions. And so it's good for NATO overall to have Sweden and Finland in membership. So I'm hopeful now that President Erdogan is through his election process. He'll be willing to give the go-ahead here. They're good negotiators, though, the Turks, so there may be something else he has in mind.
Very good point. Rose Gottemoeller, the former NATO Deputy Secretary General. We appreciate your time and your valuable insights tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure.